June 1944, the U.S.'s 2nd and 4th Marine Divisions and the Army's 27th Infantry Division hit the beaches of Saipan. Just over a week ago, the Allies made landfall in Europe, and Operation Overlord has been a major success. On June 15th, the D-Day of the Pacific begins, and Americans will face one of the toughest battles of their young nation's history. The beaches have been thoroughly cratered by shore bombardments, and on the horizon, 300 American landing vehicles are steadily streaming toward the beach. On other islands, the Japanese have allowed the Americans to make landfall almost unopposed, preferring to fight them at close quarters in the thick jungles where a bevy of booby traps and ambushes awaited them. Saipan is too important. If the Americans capture it, they'll have a key location from which to build air bases where they can strike at Japan and vital Japanese trade routes. Today, the Japanese meet the Americans bullet for bullet on the beaches. The Japanese defenders have been carefully preparing for this attack and have sighted several key positions for their artillery. As the American landing craft steam toward the beaches, sporadic and random artillery fire reaches out to them, causing minor damage to a few LVTs. However, as they near the beach, the fire becomes much more accurate. Once the landing ramps come crashing down on the first set of LVTs, the artillery fire is downright murderous. Flags set along the beach give precise range information to Japanese artillery and machine gunners, and the American Marines run into a wall of steel. Mines and barbed wire are waiting for the lucky few who escape the vicious rain of steel and shrapnel. Amphibious tanks are just now starting to make landfall, but to the infantry's dismay, the tanks are eviscerated by a round of highly precise artillery fire. Offshore, the ships supporting the invasion fleet try to respond with their own counterfire, but the crews are largely inexperienced in shore bombardment. Only the crew of a few older post-World I era battleships have much training in shore bombardment, and their accurate fire is much appreciated by the men dying on the beach by the dozens. Despite the horrible losses, the Marines managed to secure a beachhead 6 miles wide and half a mile deep. A steady stream of reinforcements swells the American beachheads, and if the Japanese are to have any hope of preventing the fall of Saipan, they must throw the invaders back to the sea. The invasion has been a surprise to the Japanese High Command, which expected an invasion elsewhere, and an emergency relief force is quickly assembled. However, the Imperial Japanese Navy must sink the American Navy to have any hope of reinforcing its besieged troops. Sensing an opportunity to deal a decisive blow to the Americans, Admiral Soemu Toyoda, Commander-in-Chief of the IJN, orders an attack on the U.S. ships around Saipan. If he wins the battle, Saipan can be saved. If he loses it, the island will fall to the Americans. For now, though, the 32,000 Japanese soldiers on Saipan have no hope of reinforcement and are facing an invasion force of over 72,000 Americans. The night of the invasion, Japanese forces muster for a massive nighttime counterattack. Most of the Japanese soldiers are battle-hardened from battles across the South Pacific and in China, while the Americans are fielding an even mix of veterans and fresh recruits. U.S. forces should be overwhelmed by the ferocity of a nighttime attack, something thousands of fresh American conscripts have never experienced before. With a mighty roar, several thousand Japanese rush at the American beachheads. Artillery covers their attack at first, but U.S. planes have significantly reduced their number during the daytime counterattacks. As the two sides meet in brutal close-quarters combat, the Japanese artillery goes quiet for fear of blowing up their own men. They don't give an inch. The Japanese infantry runs into the teeth of hastily assembled American defenses. The thick jungle gives plenty of cover to the rushing Japanese, seriously diminishing the effectiveness of American machine guns. Nonetheless, American machine guns strafe out into the dark, now being illuminated by parachute flares, repaying the Japanese attackers for the hell the Americans endured from the enemy's machine guns earlier in the day. The Marines are exhausted from a full day of fighting, but if they fail now, the beachhead will collapse and the invasion will fail. The two sides clash together like armies of old, but the American defense is resolute. With a desperate bugle call, the Japanese call for a retreat. After several hours of fighting, the Americans are bloodied, exhausted, and have taken massive casualties. But the beaches have held. For their trouble, the Japanese have suffered crippling losses. It's now clear that the invasion cannot be stopped. Saipan will fall if the Japanese garrison is not reinforced. 4 days later, the fate of the Japanese defenders is sealed. The Japanese attack group steaming toward Saipan has run straight into a U.S. submarine picket, who waits until nightfall to radio in the sighting. In the morning, the USS Albacore sneaks right into the midst of the Japanese forces and launches a spread of 6 torpedoes against the Taiho, the IJN's flagship and one of its few remaining carriers. Heroically, one of the Japanese pilots just launched off the Taiho spots the torpedoes streaming toward his ship and dives his plane down on top of one, destroying it and himself. Of 6 torpedoes launched, only 1 hits, causing minor damage to the Taiho. However, the hit on the Taiho exploded several storage tanks of aviation fuel, and while the damage has been contained, dangerous fumes have begun building up inside the Taiho. At noon, the USS Kavala launches a devastating attack against the carrier Shokaku. 3 torpedoes hit home, with one one detonating the forward aviation fuel tanks. The Shokaku shudders from the explosion, and planes on her deck in the middle of being refueled erupt into flames. The ship shudders as fires spread out of control. 10 minutes later, the order to abandon ship is given. Suddenly, though, the bow of the carrier begins to sink, and within minutes, she's slipping beneath the waves, taking 75% of her crew with her. Hours after taking what was a glancing blow, an inexperienced damage control officer aboard the Taiho decides to run the ship's venting system at full strength in order to vent out the explosive fuel fumes. Instead, the fumes spread throughout the ship, where they eventually come in contact with an electrical spark. A massive explosion rocks the ship, and the carrier is quickly engulfed in flames. The Taiho joins the Shokaku at the bottom of the Pacific Ocean. The next day, American planes search the Philippine Sea for the Japanese forces. If they slip past the American carriers, they'll be able to reach the landing forces at Saipan. Despite having lost 2 carriers already, the Japanese fleet would easily devastate the small American force defending the landings, mostly made up of post-World War I ships. Then, at around 3:40 p.m., an American scout finds the Japanese forces. The battle group is at the very limit of the American carrier force's max range, but despite this, a 2-wave attack is launched. The Japanese must not be allowed to slip past, or the landings will be doomed. And to add to the incentive, the Japanese have few carriers left. Sinking the remaining carriers will hasten an end to the war. An attack wave of 95 Hellcat fighters, 54 Avenger torpedo bombers, and 77 dive bombers roar off the flight decks of the American carriers. As the last plane takes to the sky, the second wave is already being fueled and armed. However, a new sighting report puts the Japanese forces 60 miles further than originally thought. This places them at the very maximum limits of the American planes, and with it being already so late in the day, the planes will have to land at night, an extremely dangerous proposition. The second attack wave is cancelled. Better to risk only a part of the carrier's planes on the attack. Hours later, as the sun is setting over the Philippine Sea, the American pilots finally sight the Japanese forces. Japanese oilers are struck by the first planes from the Wasp, which are concerned over their low fuel levels. The rest of the attack waves throw caution to the wind and press the attack, knowing that they might not have enough fuel to make it back. 74,000 American Marines and soldiers are counting on them. As the sun slips past the horizon, the American planes spot the main Japanese force and begin a brutal attack. Japanese defenders hastily take to the skies, and anti-aircraft fire from the ships is intense. Despite this, the attack is pressed, and the planes land several direct hits on the carrier Hayo. The carriers Zuikaku, Junyo, and Chiyoda are also damaged, but not seriously enough to be knocked out of commission. The Hayo, however, slips beneath the waves in hours. As the American forces return home, having lost only 20 planes in the attack, the Japanese battle group takes stock. It's no longer mission effective, and reluctantly, the order to withdraw is given. The fate of the 32,000 Japanese on Saipan has been sealed, but they will not go without a hell of a fight. Back on the island, American forces have pushed the Japanese steadily northwards. The Japanese bunkers litter the jungle, forcing American soldiers to destroy them with the use of flamethrowers and high explosives. Sadly, the civilian bunkers housing a population of 25,000 Japanese residents look exactly like the military bunkers, and many are incinerated or exploded by accident by attacking American forces. A large civilian holding camp is quickly erected, with the lights left on at night in order to lure in other Japanese civilians on the island. After 3 weeks, American forces have taken 2/3 of the island, and the Japanese are being steadily pushed back. There's no hope of reinforcement, and the Japanese know it. Even if the IJN was capable of braving the resupply run to the island against withering American naval firepower, there are few suitable harbors to offload supplies and reinforcements left available to the retreating Japanese. This is now a battle to the death, and the Japanese Bushido Code demands nothing less than total sacrifice. Surrender is not an option. On July 6, Lieutenant General Yoshitsugu Saito, commander of the 4,000 remaining Japanese troops in Saipan, orders all surviving soldiers and civilians to prepare for a final attack. They've been pushed right into the northern beaches, with only the Pacific Ocean at their backs. There is now nowhere to go but forward, into the teeth of the American invaders. As the sun sets, General Saito draws his sword and gives off a mighty roar. Tenno Heika Banzai! The shout is echoed by thousands of Japanese, jolting the Americans to alertness. The final battle of Saipan is about to begin, and it will be hell for both sides. The Americans are shocked at what they see. A group of 12 men carrying a large Japanese flag charge ahead of a massive formation of ferociously shouting Japanese soldiers. Incredibly, behind the Japanese infantry is a steady stream of the wounded, wrapped in bandages and on crutches, some of them only carrying sabers or pistols. Amongst the wounded is a horde of civilians armed with nothing more than sharpened bamboo spears. It is a sight no American soldier has ever seen before or since. The attackers crash into the American defenders with unbridled ferocity. A large gap exists between the 1st and 2nd Battalions of the 105th Infantry Regiment, 27th Infantry Division, which has been plugged with anti-tank weapons. The anti-tank guns blow holes in the human tsunami rushing at them, but are inevitably overwhelmed. This has split the Americans in two, and quick-thinking Japanese commanders exploit the situation to surround and overwhelm individual American forces. American soldiers and Marines are swamped on all sides by Japanese attackers, and the fighting soon turns into hand-to-hand combat as rifles are discarded for knives or pistols or used as clubs. The violence is extreme, and the Americans are slowly being overwhelmed, one defensive position at a time. Lieutenant Colonel William O'Brien, however, refuses to let his men be encircled. He brandishes dual pistols as he shouts encouragement at his men. He's severely wounded in the shoulder by a rifle round, but refuses to seek medical attention. As the human wave turns and begins to encircle his position, he orders his men to fall back as he rushes into a jeep and jumps behind the vehicle's .50 caliber machine gun. The steady roar of the Ma Deuce covers the retreating Americans until it's finally silenced. Later, when the battle is over, O'Brien's body will be found at the .50 caliber, surrounded by 30 dead Japanese soldiers. Elsewhere, Private Tom Baker has a long run out of ammunition and now uses his rifle as a club. He smashes the rifle to pieces, fending off Japanese, and finally he and his squad are forced to retreat. As they pull back, Baker is wounded and one of his squad mates picks him up, refusing to leave him behind. The soldier carrying him is killed by Japanese fire though, and Baker demands that the rest of his squad leave him behind and not risk their lives for him. They leave him with a pistol and 8 rounds and prop him up against a tree. Later, he'll be found dead with 8 Japanese bodies before him. However, the Japanese Banzai charge would break on one man who would refuse to budge. Captain Benjamin Solomon was a dentist assigned as a field surgeon. As he treats the wounded inside a medical tent, he spots a Japanese soldier trying to sneak inside under the canvas wall. Solomon throws a surgical pan at the man, then grabs a rifle from a wounded soldier and shoots. Realizing that U.S. forces can't stem the tide of the attack, Solomon orders the aid station to be evacuated, and he'll personally cover their withdrawal. Solomon jumps behind a .30 caliber machine gun and begins to lay down withering fire on the advancing Japanese. The steady thumping of the .30 cal rings out as the wounded soldiers and staff make their retreat through the dark jungle. Suddenly, it stops. When U.S. forces return after the battle, they discover Solomon's body pierced through with dozens of bullet and bayonet wounds and surrounded by 98 dead enemy soldiers. The attack completely overwhelms American forces and crashes down on the 10th Marine Artillery Battery. The artillerymen are forced to drop their howitzer barrels and fire line of sight directly into incoming human waves. Massive explosions tear through the enemy forces, but still the attack continues. The Marines are forced to destroy their own howitzers to keep them from falling into enemy hands and hastily retreat. Elsewhere, men from the 105th are completely cut off from the rest of U.S. forces and are left with only one option. Ditching their rifle and boots, the men jump into the ocean under enemy fire and begin to swim to U.S. destroyers sitting just off the shore. For 12 hours, the Banzai charge continues until finally the human wave is fully and completely expended. The Japanese have advanced 1,000 yards into U.S. lines before finally being repelled, fighting to a man and refusing surrender. U.S. losses are high, with 406 killed and 512 wounded. Japanese losses are catastrophic. The entire Banzai attack has been destroyed, with 4,311 dead. In a cave on the beach a mile away, General Saito and his staff commit ritual suicide. The attack will be the largest Banzai charge of the war, and despite the pointless sacrifice, Japan would still lose the war, while the Emperor, whose name thousands of Japanese soldiers chanted in their final charge, would go on to live a comfortable life before dying of old age. Want more brutal World War II action? Check out the insane story of the Navy battle that changed World War II, or click this other video instead.